My parents announced they were bringing 20 guests to my lake house and ordered me to fill the fridge. When I said no, Mom laughed and asked if I really thought I could stop them. By Friday morning, Dad was screaming, "What did you do to the house?" I was standing on my own porch in scrubs I hadn't changed out of yet, when my father grabbed the door handle and found out what I'd done to the house. He yanked it twice, hard, like the lock was going to apologize and let him in. Then he turned around, and there were 20-some people watching him from the gravel driveway, and his face did something I had never seen it do in 31 years of being his daughter. It broke, not in sadness, not in remorse, in the specific, raw panic of a man who has spent decades relying on other people's compliance and just learned, standing in afternoon sunlight with lawn chairs strapped to someone else's SUV, that the supply had run out. "What did you do to the house?" he said. I said nothing. Behind him, my mother was still wearing her yellow sundress, still scanning the crowd for sympathetic faces. My brother Kyle had stopped grinning. The cruiser that had turned slowly down my road was still idling at the edge of the property, and my phone was buzzing in my hand with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Claire, don't let them leave. Your father didn't just invite them for the weekend. I need to back up. I am a registered nurse. I have worked the ICU night shift at St. Augustine Regional for 6 years. I am familiar with the phrase emotionally numb. I have held the hands of people who were dying and felt nothing except clean, focused competence. Not because I don't care, but because caring without control would get someone killed. What I am not, or what I had not been for most of my adult life, is someone who says no to my family. That is the part that matters. That is the part you need to understand before any of what follows makes sense. The lake house is mine. I bought it 3 years ago after 14 months of working every available overtime shift, eating sad desk salads, and declining every social invitation that cost money. It is a 1,400 square foot A-frame on Lake Carver in central Minnesota, with a covered dock, a wood stove, and 3 bedrooms that smell like cedar and cold water. I paid $247,000 for it. The loan is in my name. The deed is in my name. My parents contributed exactly $0.00 to its existence. I need you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's easy to hear, "My parents didn't contribute to the house," and imagine a family that was distant or poor or simply not involved. That is not the Bennett family. The Bennett family is intensely involved. My mother calls twice a week. My father has opinions about every decision I have made since approximately 1999. My brother Kyle, who is 34 and has held 7 jobs in the last decade, treats my parents' house like a hotel and their bank account like a petty cash drawer. And my parents have never once used the word boundary in the context of any of this, because boundaries are something other families need. I grew up in a household where love was the reason for everything, including the things that weren't love. "I'm doing this because I love you," was how my mother explained reading my diary when I was 15. "Family takes care of family," was how my father explained why Kyle borrowed my car without asking and returned it with a cracked mirror and no gas. "You're being too sensitive," was the answer to any objection I raised until I stopped raising them, which happened around age 23 and lasted until approximately 6:04 a.m. on the Friday in question. This did not stop my father from referring to it as our family place approximately 400 times in 3 years. The first time he did it at Thanksgiving, I thought he was just being warm, generous with language. Dad had always been the type to claim territory through casual naming, his neighborhood, his team, his restaurant on Fifth. I let it go. The second time, he invited my uncle to go fishing there without asking me. I got a call from Uncle Marty at 7 a.m. on a Saturday asking which cabinet had the life jackets. I told him there were no life jackets. This was private property, and my father did not have authority to invite anyone. I called Dad afterward. He laughed and said I was being uptight. By year 2, the pattern had a rhythm I hadn't yet named. A relative would show up. I would find out from a Ring camera notification or a neighbor texting me. I would call my father. He would explain that it was fine. It was family. I was making everyone uncomfortable with my rules. I would say the rules were called property law. He would say I'd gotten too big for my britches since I bought the place. I would hang up and feel guilty, which is the Bennett family superpower, generating guilt in the person who was wronged. I installed the Ring camera system after the second unauthorized visit. 4 cameras, motion sensors, cloud storage going back 60 days. My father called the cameras paranoid. My mother said I was treating family like strangers. Kyle said the cameras were a little much. 3 people with no claim on my property, all of them having opinions about my security measures. I wrote it off. It was easier to write things off than to stare at what they meant. By the 3rd year, there had been 11 unauthorized visits. I had documentation of 9 of them. I had not yet learned to read those comments as what they were: reconnaissance. The Friday in question started at 5:47 a.m., which is when my shift ended. I had spent 12 hours watching a man named Gerald, 63, fight a losing battle with his heart. Gerald had a daughter who drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to be there, and she held his hand through the last 2 hours, and she didn't let go even after the monitor flatlined. I documented time of death at 4:31 a.m. I walked to the supply closet and stood in the dark for about 90 seconds. Then I went back out and finished my notes. That is what my night had been. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcast, just highway noise and early light and the particular hollowness that comes after a shift where you lose someone. I was 40 minutes from my apartment, stopped at a red light, when my phone lit up with the first notification. Family group chat, my mother's name. So so excited. Loading up the cars tonight. 23 messages already. Emojis I couldn't look at. My cousin Becca had sent a photo of a packed cooler. My aunt had replied with 6 consecutive champagne flutes. Kyle had written LFG and 3 fire emojis. Then, below everything, a private text from my mother. We're surprising you at the lake house this weekend. 20 people. You need to see your family more. I stared at it long enough that the light changed and the car behind me honked. The thing is, we had already had this conversation. Last week, in my parents' kitchen, while my mother served coffee, and my father sat at the table like he always sits, centered, waiting to be agreed with. I had told them the lake house wasn't available this weekend. I had a friend from nursing school coming to visit. I needed quiet. I needed sleep. The answer was no. My mother had nodded, put her hand over mine on the table, said, "Of course, honey, we understand." She had then gone home and sent a group text to 23 relatives announcing the weekend trip. I sat in my car in front of my apartment building and did not panic. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. I had spent 6 years in the ICU. I know what to do when something goes wrong. You identify the problem. You identify the resources. You act. I called a locksmith at 6:04 a.m. "Can you change all 3 locks today? I can pay double the standard rate. I can be there in 45 minutes. I'll be there in an hour." At 6:11 a.m., I called the Carver County Sheriff's Office. I was calm. I stated my name, my property address, and explained that I was the sole owner of a property that a group of people intended to access without my permission. The dispatcher transferred me to Deputy Marcus Tran, who asked the right questions in the right order, which told me he had dealt with this particular species of situation before. "Do you have documentation that you denied access?" Text messages. "Last week." Timestamped. "And they're coming anyway." "Yes." "Do you want a deputy on scene?" "Please." I showered in 8 minutes, changed into jeans and a gray pullover, drank half a cup of coffee standing over my kitchen sink, and drove 90 minutes to Lake Carver without telling a single member of my family I was coming. The locksmith, a compact guy named Pete, who showed up in a white van that said Carver Keys and Security on the side, was still working on the back door when I pulled into my driveway. I tipped him an extra $40. He finished in 32 minutes and handed me 3 sets of new keys. I walked the perimeter, checked all 4 cameras from my Ring app, made sure the motion alerts were live, confirmed cloud recording was active. Then I stood on my porch in the afternoon quiet and waited. I heard them before I saw them. The crunch of gravel, 3 cars in a line, an SUV with 2 kayaks strapped to the roof, and a minivan full of cousins whose names I could not immediately recall. My uncle's truck, the big one, with the tailgate I can never look at without remembering a summer when I was 12 and actually happy to be with these people. Kyle was hanging out the passenger window of the second car, laughing at something. The sight of him laughing, relaxed, heading toward a place he had no right to be, did something complicated to my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something older and quieter than anger. My father's door opened first. He got out red-faced, performing the specific theatrical confusion of a man who has never had a plan fail because the plan had always been other people's capitulation. "Claire," he spread his hands. "What is this?" "This is my house, Dad," he laughed. The patronizing laugh I have heard my entire life, the one that means you're being emotional without the inconvenience of having to say it. "Don't be dramatic. Everyone drove 4 hours. That's not my problem." My mother emerged from the passenger side in her yellow sundress, already surveying the audience behind her, calibrating her performance. "Honey," she said, in the slow, patient voice she uses when she thinks I'm confused rather than deliberate. "We talked about this. You told me okay. Then you lied to 20 people." Her smile flickered. It was brief, just a split second where the mask didn't quite hold, and then it was back, warmer, more sorrowful, more designed to make me feel like the problem. "You're exhausted," she said. "You've been working too hard. You don't know what you're saying." I had just watched a man die. I had driven 90 minutes on no sleep. I had planned and executed a complete property access intervention before 10 a.m. I knew exactly what I was saying. Kyle walked up last, hands in his pockets, that loose, easy grin he's had since we were teenagers. The grin of someone who has never once faced a consequence he couldn't borrow his way out of. "Come on, sis. You really gonna stop us? Over a house? Over a house." Over the house I worked nights to pay for while Kyle moved between my parents' couch and a series of apartments they quietly subsidized. Over the house I had driven to alone after the shifts that ate me alive, because it was the one place I had built myself for myself that had no history of other people's needs attached to it. "Yes," I said, "over my house." My father stepped forward, voice dropping. He has a warning voice. I have been afraid of it at various points in my life for stupid reasons. "Claire, open the door." "No." He grabbed the handle, pulled it again. He stood there, holding a door handle that didn't yield, and something crossed his face. Disbelief, confusion, the specific vertigo of someone who has walked through a door 100 times and found it locked for the first time. "What did you do?" He turned. "Did you change the locks?" "This morning." You can't. I'm your father, and this is my property." He turned to the crowd with his hands out, the wronged patriarch playing to the gallery, and that's when Deputy Marcus Tran's cruiser turned slowly down my road. I need to tell you about Deputy Tran, because he matters. Marcus Tran had been with the Carver County Sheriff's Office for 11 years. He drove a standard-issue Ford Explorer and wore his uniform like someone who was used to being in the middle of things he didn't start. When he stepped out, he took one long look at the crowd, then at my father, then at me on the porch. "Who's in charge here?" My father straightened. "I'm her father." That wasn't my question. I pressed the speaker button on my Ring FaceTiming app. The small black camera on the porch corner clicked on, and I spoke into my phone. Deputy Tran, this is Claire Bennett, property owner. No one here has my permission to enter the premises. 23 heads turned toward the camera. My father's jaw went hard. Claire, he said very quietly, hang up. Deputy Tran looked at him the way you look at someone who has said something that proves your read of the situation was correct. Sir, you and your guests need to vacate the property. The crowd began to shift. I watched it happen, the shuffling, the exchanged looks, the dawning understanding among cousins and aunts and uncles that they had been brought to a place they had no legal right to be, and that the woman standing on the porch with the camera and the new locks and the county deputy was not going to be moved. My mother started crying. Not the way people cry when they're overwhelmed. The way she's always cried, with her chin lifted, making sure the tears were visible, making sure everyone in the audience registered them as evidence of her suffering. Kyle wasn't grinning anymore, and my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Claire, don't let them leave. Your father didn't just invite them for the weekend. I stared at the message for 3 seconds. Then I looked up at my father, who was standing in my driveway arguing with Deputy Tran in a lowered voice, one hand moving in the air the way it always does when he's building a case. I stepped off the porch. Deputy Tran, can you ask everyone to stay for a moment? He looked at me. One beat. He had the face of a man who had learned over 11 years that when the property owner asks you to hold the scene, you hold the scene. Nobody leave, he said, not raising his voice, not needing to. I walked to the far end of the dock, where the water was dark and flat in the afternoon light, and called the unknown number back. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, professional. She told me her name, Margaret Holm, and that she was a licensed private investigator out of Minneapolis, licensed since 2009, formerly an investigative auditor for a regional financial crimes unit. She said she had been hired 6 months ago. She said she had been trying to find the right time to contact me, and that the right time had become urgent once she'd confirmed the weekend visit was planned. I was hired by your father's business partner, she said, a man named Dale Vickers. I don't know if you know that name. I didn't. Your father has been in a joint business venture with Vickers for 3 years. Commercial real estate development. They were acquiring and flipping distressed commercial properties in the Western Metro. The short version is that the venture is in serious trouble. Both men are facing potential fraud allegations, misrepresented earnings to investors, inflated asset valuations, to investors who are now pursuing civil action. Vickers hired me originally to document the full scope of the venture's assets and liabilities. That work led me to your father's personal asset representations, which is where things got complicated for you. She paused. I could hear her shuffling through something. Papers, or maybe a tablet. Your father has been telling his investors for 2 years that the lake house is a family asset, that it's jointly owned. He's used it as collateral in at least one documented conversation with one of the investors. He produced something, I've seen a reference to a document, that allegedly establishes shared family ownership. My hands were not shaking. I want to be honest about that. My hands were perfectly still, in the way that hands are still when the body has gone somewhere past fear into something cold and clear. Are you saying my father tried to use my house as collateral for a fraudulent investment scheme? I'm saying you need to talk to a real estate attorney before anyone else does. Today, if possible. She paused. And I'm saying the 20 people in your driveway were not just a spontaneous family visit. I've been monitoring your father's communications for 6 months. 2 of the people in that caravan are investors. Your father has been constructing a narrative, family property, family consensus, everyone gathered together, enjoying the lake house for generations, for a significant period of time. I believe he needed this weekend specifically. He needed photographs. He needed witnesses. He needed the whole thing to look organic and long-standing. The dock creaked under my feet. Out on the lake, a loon called once and then went silent. Are you saying my father tried to use my house as collateral for a fraudulent investment scheme? I'm saying you need to talk to a real estate attorney before anyone else does. And I'm saying the 20 people in your driveway were not just a spontaneous family visit. There were 2 investors in that caravan. Your father has been building a narrative, family property, family consensus, everyone gathered together to enjoy the place, for some time. I think he needed witnesses. I think he needed the weekend to look normal. I have a friend from nursing school named Declan Marsh. Declan is not a nurse anymore. He went to law school at 32, the way some people do when they're tired of being asked to fix other people's messes without legal authority. He is now an associate at a real estate and property law firm in Minneapolis. He is also the friend who was supposed to visit me that weekend, before my family decided to visit instead. I called him from the dock. He answered on the 3rd ring. You sound like someone died. Someone tried to steal my house. 3-second pause. Tell me everything. I told him everything. All of it. Margaret Holm, Dale Vickers, the investors, the collateral conversations. Declan was quiet through most of it, the particular quiet of someone taking mental notes. When I finished, he said, don't let anyone leave. Don't let your father have an unsupervised conversation with anyone in that driveway. And if he tries to go back to his car, you need to know if there's a briefcase or a bag. Why? Because if he brought documentation to establish a shared interest in the property, anything with both your names, anything that looked like joint ownership, and he was planning to get 20 people to watch him walk through that door like it's his house, then you are very close to the setup for something that would have been very hard to undo. I hung up. I looked back at the driveway. My father was still talking to Deputy Tran. My mother had found a cousin to lean on. Kyle was sitting on the hood of the second car, and something about his posture, behavior, the way he wasn't making eye contact with anyone, the way his phone was face down on his knee, told me he knew, not everything, but enough. I walked back up the dock and across the gravel and stopped in front of my father. He looked at me with the expression he reserves for when he's decided I'm being irrational. The expression that has always been designed to make me feel like the conversation is already over because he's already won it. Claire, this has gone far enough. People are upset. Let's go inside and, is Dale Vickers here? The color drained from my father's face in a way I have no other description for. It wasn't a flush or a pallor. It was a drain. Like something vital had been siphoned out in the space between the question and the silence. What did you say? Dale Vickers, your business partner. Margaret Holmes sends her regards. My father's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He glanced, involuntarily, the way people glance at things they're trying not to reveal, to his left, toward a man I didn't recognize, standing slightly apart from the group, not in beachwear like the others, but in khakis and a linen shirt, calm-faced, watching everything without participating in it. That was Dale Vickers. He was shorter than I expected, with the groomed, patient look of someone who had been in enough rooms where money was at stake to know how to make himself unreadable. He didn't react when I looked at him. He just held my gaze for 2 seconds and then looked away. I don't know what she told you, my father said. His voice had changed. The warning tone was gone. Something smaller and more frightened had replaced it. She doesn't have the full picture. What we were building, it was going to benefit everyone. The investment was going to pay. Did you tell Dale Vickers that my lake house was family-owned, jointly held, backed by family financial support? It's more complicated than, yes or no, Dad. My father looked at Deputy Tran, then back at me, then at the crowd behind him, which had gone very, very quiet. I was going to tell you, he said finally. When it paid out, you would have had income from it. I was protecting the investment. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded document, set it on the porch railing. It was for both our benefit, he said. I didn't touch the document. I looked at Deputy Tran. Deputy, I believe there may be a document here in which my property has been fraudulently represented to third-party investors. I'd like that entered into evidence, or at minimum documented, before anyone on this property handles it. Deputy Tran pulled out his radio. What followed was not dramatic in the way that television has trained us to expect drama. There was no shouting. No one ran. My mother sat down heavily in a lawn chair someone had already unloaded from the minivan, and she stayed there for a long time, not performing anything, which was the most unsettling thing I had ever seen her do. Kyle disappeared to the far end of the driveway and made a phone call. I would find out later he was calling his own lawyer, a fact that told me more about what he'd known and when than anything he could have said to my face. Deputy Tran called for a second unit and spent 30 minutes documenting names and taking statements. He connected me with the Carver County Sheriff's Detective Division on his radio, and I spoke briefly with Detective Linda Sorensen, who said she would be in touch by Monday, and that I should not discuss the document with my father or allow him to retrieve it. I called Declan back and relayed all of it. He drove from Minneapolis that night. He arrived at 9:47 p.m. with a six-pack and his laptop bag, and we sat at my kitchen table and went through everything until 2 a.m. My deed, my mortgage documents, the folded paper from my father's jacket, Margaret Holmes' preliminary report, which she had emailed me in a PDF that I immediately forwarded to Declan and Detective Sorensen. The document my father had brought was a family property agreement, a document he had apparently drafted himself, or had drafted, asserting that the lake house was a shared family asset acquired with family financial support. It was dated 8 months ago. My signature was on it. My signature, which I had never signed. Forgery, Declan said. Not dramatically, just a word. Can they prove it? Signature analysis is a whole field. But more importantly, do you have any document you actually signed around that date? Anything with your real signature from that period? I had 7. Nursing license renewal, lease renewal on my apartment, a form from my 401k provider, 2 documents from my mortgage servicer, a car registration, a voter registration update. 7 authentic signatures from the same 8-month window. We scanned them all that night. The civil fraud investigation took 8 months. I am condensing because the actual process is boring in the way that legal processes are boring, full of waiting and emails and document requests and depositions where you sit in a conference room and answer questions for 6 hours and then go home and eat cereal for dinner because you have nothing left, but some of it matters enough to put in order. Detective Linda Sorensen of the Carver County Sheriff's Criminal Investigations Unit met with me that Monday. She was 48, direct, and had spent 9 years working financial fraud before transferring to Carver County for reasons she didn't explain and I didn't ask about. She reviewed Margaret Holmes' preliminary report, my documentation of the unauthorized visits, and the folded document my father had produced. She told me the criminal threshold for fraud in Minnesota required proving intent to deceive, and that was going to depend significantly on what the forged signature analysis showed. Declan had already contacted Dr. Carolyn Reyes, a forensic document examiner based in St. Paul who had spent 22 years testifying in fraud cases across state and federal court. She was expensive and she was worth it. I paid the retainer with money I had been saving for a new dock railing, which is a sentence that still makes me laugh in a darkroom kind of way. Dr. Reyes's examination took 3 weeks. Her report was 14 pages. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signature on the family property agreement was not mine. Different pen pressure, different letter formation, inconsistent baseline angle. She noted, with the dry precision of someone who has done this long enough to stop being outraged by it, that the forger had clearly practiced. The signature had the deliberate, slightly stiff quality of a reproduced shape rather than a spontaneous action. She had seen this pattern before. She could explain the distinction to a jury in under 10 minutes. I've seen this pattern before, was, I realized, a thing a lot of professionals in this story were going to say. Dale Vickers' attorney contacted Declan during week 3 of the investigation and offered a statement in exchange for cooperation. Vickers' position, which proved to be substantially accurate, was that he had been told the lakefront property was jointly owned by my father and immediate family members. He had documentation, my father's documentation, that he had relied on in good faith. He was not unwilling to testify to that effect. My father retained a defense attorney named Gerald Pruitt, who appeared to be very good at his job, and who argued, with some creativity, that my father had operated under a genuine belief that the property was a shared family asset, given the relational history of collective use. This argument would have been more compelling if Judge Wembley had not had access to every Ring camera notification I had generated over 2 years, every text message in which I had denied access, and the recording from my Ring speaker in which I had explicitly stated on the record to a sheriff's deputy in front of 23 witnesses that no one present had permission to enter the premises. That recording turned out to matter a great deal. Criminal charges were ultimately not filed. The county attorney's office concluded that while the signature forgery was provable, the overall fraud case was more cleanly pursued through civil channels, and the investors' attorneys were already deep into that process. This disappointed me more than I expected. I had carried the word forgery around for 8 months, and having it confirmed and then essentially set aside felt like something I couldn't quite put down. What happened instead was a civil judgment. Carver County District Court. Honorable Patricia Wembley presiding. My father and his former business partner were ordered to repay Vickers's and Nguyen's investments plus accrued interest, totaling just over $612,000. Combined with legal fees and the cost of the forensic examination and Margaret Holmes' full investigative report, my father's financial exposure was in excess of $800,000. He did not have $800,000. The assets he had built over 30 years, the small construction business, the commercial building he owned outright, 2 investment accounts, were substantially liquidated over the following 14 months. The lake house, which he had tried to claim as collateral, appeared nowhere in the judgment because the property was mine, had always been mine, and Declan had filed a preemptive motion to that effect so early in the proceedings that the question was settled before it was ever seriously raised. Vickers received partial restitution. Paul Nguyen received slightly more. Neither of them were made whole. That's how fraud cases go. The money is usually already gone by the time the court gets to it. My mother filed for legal separation 4 months after the judgment. She called me once afterward. She said she hadn't known everything. I believe parts of that. I believe she knew more than she claimed and chose not to know the rest, which is a choice she made and will have to live with. We spoke for 22 minutes. We have not spoken since. Kyle had known for about 4 months that something was wrong with the investment. He hadn't known about the forged document. He knew about the investors. He had said nothing because his relationship with our father was built on a system of small silences traded for small subsidies, and he was not willing to risk that economy for my benefit. He called me once too. He said he was sorry. I said, okay, it is the truest thing I've said that meant nothing at all. I still have the lake house. I have been asked by more people than I expected whether I feel guilty about what happened to my father, the dissolution, the separation, the magnitude of the consequences. These people expect a complicated answer. They are waiting for me to say something about grief or ambivalence, or the way love survives damage. Here is my complicated answer. I feel nothing about it that isn't grounded in the specific documentable facts of what he did. He forged my name on a legal document. He used my property as collateral for a fraudulent investment scheme. He recruited 23 family members, wittingly or not, to be the audience for a fiction he had been building for 2 years. He had been calling my house our family place since the week I bought it, and I had been too tired, too kind, too in the habit of compliance to understand what that phrase was doing, that it was a claim, not an endearment. I understand it now. 3 months after the judgment, I drove to Lake Carver on a Thursday morning. I had the day off. I stopped at a hardware store on the way and bought a small brass plate, the kind you screw beside a door. I engraved it myself with a tool the hardware store had at the counter. C. Bennett, owner. I drove to the lake house in silence. I took the long way, past the county road where the pines get dense and the light goes green and cool. I put the key in the new lock, the one Pete installed that morning in April when everything turned, when the first domino fell, and I opened the door. I walked through every room. Then I sat on the covered dock with a cup of coffee and watched the water, which was doing what water always does, which is hold whatever light falls on it and give nothing back. At some point, I screwed the little brass plate beside the front door. I stood back and looked at it. C. Bennett, owner. Not our family place, mine.